At 1 a.m., they deported a 9-year-old girl. No judge, no hearing, no record she ever existed. But one congresswoman found the file they tried to bury, and what she uncovered inside that committee room will make you question who justice is really for. The fluorescent lights of the House Oversight Committee room cast harsh shadows across manila folders scattered like fallen leaves on Representative Jasmine Crockett's desk. Each folder contained a story, some with endings, others abandoned mid-sentence. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m., its steady tick the only sound breaking the silence of the Capitol building's empty corridors. Crockett's fingers traced the edge of a thin file folder that didn't belong with the others. No official ICE stamp, no case number sequence. Just a handwritten notepaper clipped to the front. Found this in my office. Thought you should see it. M. Rodriguez, immigration attorney. She opened it. Inside, a single photograph stared back at her, a 9-year-old girl with dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile clutching a stuffed elephant. Clipped behind it a form titled Emergency Deportation Order, with a timestamp, January 15th, wash 0 a.m. No judicial signature, no court hearing scheduled, just a name that would disappear into the night. Maria Santos, age 27, Guadalupe Santos, age 9. The file felt heavier than it should have. The next morning arrived with the persistent buzz of Crockett's phone. She answered without looking at the caller ID, her voice still thick with too little sleep. "Rodriguez here! Did you read it?" Crockett shifted the phone to her other ear, the file still open on her nightstand. The Santos case. "Miguel, this can't be right. They loaded them onto a plane without a hearing. 1 a.m. departure from Dallas. The plane was stopped on the tarmac when I filed an emergency stay. But here's the thing, Jasmine ICE has no official record of this case existing." The words hung in the air like smoke. Crockett could hear the frustration bleeding through the phone line, the exhaustion of a man who had spent 15 years fighting a system that seemed to rewrite its own rules overnight. How is that possible? That's what I've been asking myself. I have the mother's sworn affidavit. I have the detention records, but according to ICE's database, Maria and Guadalupe Santos were never in federal custody. Crockett closed her eyes, processing the implications. A ghost case. A disappearing act performed in plain sight. "Send me everything you have." "Already did. Check your secure email." The line went dead. Crockett reached for her laptop, her hands moving with the precision of someone who had learned to navigate Washington's labyrinthine systems through sheer force of will. The email contained 14 attachments, photos, affidavits, timestamps, and at the bottom, an audio file labeled simply Maria Santos' final statement. She hesitated before clicking play. A woman's voice emerged from the laptop speakers, speaking in accented English that carried the weight of desperation. "I begged them to wait. My daughter. She's only 9. She doesn't understand what's happening. I told them we have a court date next month, but they said court dates don't matter anymore. They said some people don't deserve trials." The recording crackled with static, but the woman's words remained clear. "I asked them, what about due process? And the man, he laughed. He said, that's for Americans." Crockett closed the laptop harder than necessary. 3 days later, the House Oversight Committee room filled with the familiar tension that preceded political theater. Representatives filed in with the practiced movements of actors taking their marks, each knowing their role in the performance that would unfold. Jim Jordan entered with his characteristic swagger, his jacket already off, sleeves rolled up as if preparing for manual labor rather than legislative discourse. He exchanged nods with fellow Republicans, their confidence radiating the unshakable belief that they held both the moral high ground and the constitutional authority to reshape America's definition of justice. Crockett sat at the far end of the Democratic side, the Santos file closed but within arm's reach. She watched Jordan's preparation ritual, the shuffling of papers, the testing of his microphone, the way he positioned his water glass exactly 3 inches to the right of his nameplate. Everything calculated for maximum effect. Committee Chairman James Comer called the session to order, his gavel striking wood with the finality of a judge's sentence. The topic: Oversight of Immigration and Customs Enforcement Operations, Ensuring Effective Border Security. The title alone made Crockett's jaw tighten. Jordan was the first to speak, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man who had never doubted his own righteousness. Mr. Chairman, we're here today because the American people deserve to know that their tax dollars aren't being wasted on endless legal proceedings for people who have no right to be in this country in the first place. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room like a prosecutor addressing a jury. The Constitution is clear about who deserves its protections. We cannot and we will not allow our courts to be overwhelmed by frivolous claims from illegal aliens who think they can game the system. The words illegal aliens dropped into the room like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of tension that reached every corner. Crockett felt her heartbeat quicken. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not just since receiving the Santos file, but since the day she first raised her hand to swear an oath to defend the Constitution. She raised her hand to be recognized. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized. She stood slowly, deliberately, her movement drawing every eye in the room. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address the gentleman from Ohio's comments about constitutional protections. Jordan's smirk was barely concealed. I welcome the opportunity to discuss constitutional law with the gentlewoman. Crockett opened the Santos file, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The gentleman speaks of the Constitution as if it were a membership card, something that only applies to those he deems worthy. But I hold in my hand evidence of what happens when we decide that some people don't deserve trials. She lifted the photograph of Guadalupe Santos, holding it high enough for the cameras to capture. This is Guadalupe Santos. She's 9 years old. 3 weeks ago, she and her mother were loaded onto a deportation flight at 1 a.m. without a hearing, without due process, without even the basic dignity of a court appearance. Jordan leaned into his microphone. If they're here illegally, if Crockett's voice cut through his interruption like a blade. Mr. Jordan, are you suggesting we should deport first and ask questions later? Are you suggesting that a 9-year-old child doesn't deserve to have her case heard by a judge? I'm suggesting that people who break our laws don't get to tie up our courts with endless appeals. Due process isn't an appeal, Mr. Jordan. It's a constitutional guarantee. Crockett pulled out a printed document holding it like evidence in a trial. The Fifth Amendment. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It says person, Mr. Jordan, not citizen, person. The room had grown completely silent except for the whir of cameras and the scratch of reporters' pens. Jordan shifted in his seat, his confidence flickering for just a moment. The 14th Amendment. Crockett continued, her voice growing stronger. Guarantees equal protection under the law to any person within our jurisdiction. These aren't membership benefits, Mr. Jordan. These are human rights. And the last time I checked, children are human beings regardless of how they arrived on American soil. An ICE legal counsel seated at the witness table cleared his throat. Representative Crockett, if I may address the practical realities of immigration enforcement. The practical realities. Crockett turned to face him, her expression sharp with barely contained fury. Let me tell you about practical realities. A mother begging officers to wait for her daughter's court date. A 9-year-old girl asking why the men won't let her say goodbye to her teacher. A deportation order signed at midnight with no judge's signature. She moved closer to the witness table, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying more power than when she shouted. The practical reality is that we loaded a child onto a plane at 1 a.m. and told her mother that trials are for Americans. The practical reality is that we have created a system where your zip code when you're born determines whether you get constitutional rights. The ICE counsel straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Representative, I think you're mischaracterizing our enforcement procedures. Am I? Crockett returned to her desk and retrieved a manila folder. I have Maria Santos's sworn affidavit. Shall I read it aloud? She didn't wait for permission. Her voice filled the room, carrying the weight of testimony given in desperation. I begged them to wait. My daughter, she's only 9. She doesn't understand what's happening. I told them we have a court date next month, but they said court dates don't matter anymore. They said some people don't deserve trials. Each word landed with the force of accusation. Several committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I asked them what about due process, and the man, he laughed. He said that's for Americans. Crockett looked up from the affidavit, her eyes finding Jordan's. That's for Americans. As if the Constitution were a country club membership instead of the supreme law of the land. Jordan leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher addressing a stubborn student. Representative Crockett, you're talking about one isolated incident. One more. Crockett's laugh held no humor. Mr. Jordan, this isn't isolated. This is systematic. We have created 2 tiers of justice in America, one for people we like and one for people we don't. She walked to the center of the room, positioning herself where both parties could see her clearly. Same soil, same taxes, same communities, but not the same justice. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge. We're asking children to respect laws that don't respect them as human beings. We're asking families to trust a system that has decided they don't deserve trials. And we're asking ourselves to sleep at night while knowing that somewhere, right now, there's a 9-year-old girl trying to understand why she was put on a plane at 1 a.m. without anyone asking if she belonged here. Jordan tried to interrupt, but Crockett wasn't finished. The gentleman from Ohio talks about people gaming the system. But what do you call it when we change the rules in the middle of the night? What do you call it when we decide that constitutional rights have an expiration date based on documentation status? She turned to face the cameras directly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen enough injustice to last a lifetime. I want everyone watching to understand what we're really debating here. We're not debating border security. We're not debating immigration policy. We're debating whether a 9-year-old girl deserves to have her case heard by a judge before we exile her from the only country she's ever known. The room was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning became audible. We're debating whether the Constitution means what it says or whether it means what's convenient for us to believe on any given day. Crockett returned to her seat, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she placed both hands on the desk and leaned forward, her eyes scanning every face in the room. So, let me ask each of you, every single person in this room, a simple question. She paused, letting the silence build. Who here believes that only citizens deserve trials? Silence stretched across the room like a held breath. Republicans looked at their papers. Democrats stared at their hands. The Ice Council studied his water glass as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Who here is willing to look into a camera and tell the American people that a 9-year-old girl doesn't deserve due process because of where her mother was born? When 2020, still no one spoke. Who here is prepared to explain to their own children why some kids get constitutional rights and others get midnight deportations? Jordan finally raised his head, his voice lower than before. Representative Crockett, you're oversimplifying a complex issue. Am I? She pulled out her phone and held it up. This is a text message I received at 6:23 this morning from Miguel Rodriguez, the attorney who handled the Santos case. It says, 2 more cases this week. Same pattern. No hearings. No records. Do you want the files? She lowered the phone, her expression conveying exhaustion that ran deeper than physical tiredness. This isn't complex, Mr. Jordan. This is simple. Either we believe in constitutional rights for everyone under our jurisdiction, or we believe in constitutional rights for people we like. Either we believe in due process, or we believe in midnight deportations. She finally sat down, but her voice carried just as much power from the chair. Either we believe that all children deserve justice, or we believe that justice is a privilege to be rationed based on paperwork. The committee chairman cleared his throat. The gentlewoman's time has expired. Crockett looked directly into the main camera, her voice soft but unmistakable. Time may have expired, Mr. Chairman. But constitutional rights don't have expiration dates, and neither does our obligation to protect them. She closed the Santos file but kept her hand resting on it. The question isn't whether we can deport people at 1 a.m. without trials. The question is whether we should. And if we decide we should, then we need to be honest about what kind of country we're choosing to become. The gavel struck the desk with finality, but the echo seemed to last longer than usual. This hearing is adjourned. As representatives filed out of the room, their conversations muted and uncomfortable, Crockett remained in her seat. The Santos file lay closed before her, but the questions it contained remained wide open. Outside the committee room windows, Washington, D.C. continued its daily rhythm. Tourists taking pictures, staffers hurrying between meetings, life proceeding as if the fundamental nature of American justice hadn't just been dissected under fluorescent lights. But somewhere in the country, a 9-year-old girl was trying to understand why she had been put on a plane at 1 a.m. without anyone asking if she belonged here. And somewhere else, another child was probably learning that in America, constitutional rights weren't guaranteed, they were rationed. The clock on the wall read 2:47 p.m. In 11 hours, it would be 1 a.m. again. Time for another midnight deportation. Time for another family to discover that due process was a privilege, not a right. Time for another name to disappear from the official records, leaving behind only the questions that no one in power seemed willing to answer. Crockett gathered her papers and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the empty room. Behind her, the cameras powered down and the lights dimmed, but the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of questions left unanswered, of justice deferred, of children who deserved trials but received only midnight flights to countries they had never really known. The silence of a system that had forgotten that constitutional rights weren't membership benefits, they were the foundation upon which everything else was built. And in that silence, Guadalupe Santos's gap-toothed smile from the photograph seemed to ask the question that would haunt everyone who had been in that room. If a 9-year-old girl doesn't deserve due process, then who does? The answer echoed through the empty corridors of power, carried by the ghosts of every person who had ever believed that America meant what it said about justice for all. Same soil, same burden, but not the same justice. The scales of justice weren't just unbalanced, they had been rigged from the start. And somewhere in the darkness of 1 a.m., another plane was preparing for departure.